thank you all for coming. I was ringing up my old friend Simon Walters, who's the head of politics at the Daily Mail. I told him I was going to do this tonight, and he said, well, in 1974, he was a young reporter sent to cover the hustings here in Brentford and Isleworth, and there was, it was the Labour press conference, and there was Sam Silkin, Lord Silkin, as he became the Attorney General, and there was the local MP whose name was Walker, rather an able man. Not a single voter turned up. And so there was he was the only person who listened to Lord Silkin and the Labour candidate for about half an hour. But then we got a really good, instead tonight we've got a fantastic audience, real atmosphere. And I want to just describe the way what we're gonna do. I'm going to interrogate the candidates for about up to an hour, maybe a bit less. We'll see how it goes. With absolutely lethal scrutiny. I've been coached by Bridget, who was a producer on politics shows at the BBC. She scares me witless, by the way. Then we're going to, here she is on my right. If I mess up, she's here to sort of tell me in no uncertain terms. And then we're going to throw it open for questions at the end. Then the next thing is to say is that we're going to have a show of hands first. How many people in this audience have not yet made up their mind? Are floating voters? Wow. Quite a few, maybe about a quarter of the room, just under a quarter, 20%. And then I want to know what is most important for you in deciding who to vote for in the election. The national policies outlined in the manifestos, irrespective of the gifts or otherwise of the local candidate, or indeed whether the candidate makes a difference to how you're going to vote. So first of all, well, who says the candidate is going to make a difference to how you're voting tonight? And that is fascinating. So that really puts our guests on their mettle. They've got to really perform, otherwise they're obviously going to lose the election. Now I'm just going to make sure my and first of all, I'm going to aim a question or two at Seena. Now this is on the subject of Brexit, which we're raising so as to get it away with as soon as possible, but we're going to stick with it for a bit. Seena, what do we? Your leader says we're going to get Brexit done. What does that mean?
So I mean that quote is a particularly simplistic explanation of what the point is we've been umming and ahhing about what that even looks like, the beginning process of that for 3.5 years, and because of the indecision we've seen in Parliament, no progress has been made. And for me and every other Conservative candidate, what that means is if you vote Conservative and you get a majority Conservative government, then you've got a team of people that are going to vote for Boris Johnson's deal and actually start the process to move forward so that we can get on with our country's priorities, investing in the NHS, investing in our education and investing in our police.
Can you tell me, in that case, what was it about British membership of the European Union which prevented you from investing in education, the police and the NHS?
When the Conservative and Lib Dem coalition took over government from the Labour Party, our economy was in absolute dire straits. Nobody would run their household finances like that. Why should we run our country finances like that? It's absolutely shocking. What you need is good fiscal and monetary governance, and that way you can invest in public services. We have seen the cuts we've seen.
Sorry, you must answer the question.
Okay.
The question I said, what was it about British membership? Don't worry, Ruth, I think they're going to be just as tough on you. What was it about British membership of the European Union which prevented us from investing in the NHS, education and so on?
I don't think that it was the membership of the EU that prevented us from investing in these things.
Why did you say it was?
No, I didn't say that.
You said you needed to get Brexit done in order to invest in education and get on with the NHS.
No, I said so we can move on with our priorities and start discussing those things. At the moment, Brexit has taken so much bandwidth. We've not been able to have the important discussions we needed to have about social care, about holistic and long-term solutions to many of the country's problems that we're facing now. We must stop talking about Brexit. We can't talk about it for the next 20 decades or however long it takes for the Lib Dems or Labour to make up their mind whether they want to respect a referendum or not. I think what is really, really important is that, look, whether you like it or not, whether it was the way you wanted it to fall or not, the country raised its voice through the ballot box and said, look, we want to leave. And we must respect that. The moment we say your vote does not matter, I think this is no longer a democracy, and I have a real problem with that.
Would either Ruth or Helen, would you like to ask a question of Seena on this front? Before I start to turn mercilessly on you.
So why was Brexit? Why was the referendum pushed through in 2016? Given never in any polls was membership of the EU. It never came up in the top 5 issues that people raised on the doors among pollsters. It was never a major national issue among ordinary people before 2016. So why has it caused so much bandwidth?
At the end of the day, we had the referendum. There was enough of an appetite to have because David Cameron went to the EU and said we need to have these reforms. There were some grumblings of stuff that people were not happy about, and they refused to reform. And therefore, we had the referendum, and the people had their say. And I think it's really sad that neither of you two will respect it.
Which Brexit did everybody vote for?
Well, they certainly didn't vote to revoke Article 50.
I don't think that's the question. You didn't answer. You say it's taking a long time to get Brexit decided. That's because the Brexiteers have all been disagreeing with each other because there's not a clarity. There's no majority for any particular given Brexit. And you need to have which one? So you can answer it.
They voted for Boris's deal.
Boris's deal did not exist in 2016. So tell me.
Anyway, you want to answer, then I'll move on.
I would like to answer, yes. Look, the people have voted to leave the EU, not Europe, and I think it's really, really important. They have a problem with the institution itself. They have a problem with the lack of governance. They have a problem with how little trade we can do across the whole world. There's lots of different reasons why people voted to leave. And to say that I can sum it up in one sentence, I'm not going to speak for 17.4 million people because they all had very different reasons for wanting to leave. My reasons are different from anyone else that I know. And I'm not going to sit here and say it's a simple reason why they voted to leave. And therefore, Brexit and what Brexit looks like needs to be a discussion. It needs to be had by parliamentarians that respect what the people voted for and get on with it, instead of trying to find reasons not to.
Can I just ask one final question, Seena, which bothers me a bit? It's this, the Get Brexit Done mantra, which is basically the election manifesto. It doesn't make a lot. It's a
There's
headline.
lots of policies. I've got them all here.
There are, but they were not very well received by the Financial Times. Seemed to think it was just a sort of stay as you were proposal. Never mind. The key point which bothers me is the idea that Brexit is over when we exercise Article 50 on the 31st of January. I was just looking at BBC briefing reality check here. It does. It sorts out a very few things, but the whole trade deal, which we're going to have with Europe, is massively complex, and all the people who seem to understand about trade deals seem to think it's going to take years, not months. And so Brexit is not going to be done. It's going to go on dominating the airwaves and the discussions for a long time. So there is a dishonesty, isn't there, in that slogan.
The slogan represents the sentiment that we want to move forward with those negotiations. The point is right now, we're not even on the start of that track to get on with Brexit. And what we must do is we must agree this deal so that we can come out and we can start to have the discussions, the negotiations we need to figure out what that longer term agreement looks like. But at the moment, we can't even get there.
Now, thank you very much, Seena. The next mastermind candidate is Helen Cross of the Liberal Democrats. Now, what I'm trying to get my head around, Helen, is your policy of revoke. Mm-hmm. So you're anti, we get it, you want us just to stay in the EU.
Very clear, yes.
Yeah, we get that. Now, everybody knows, in fact your leader has even said so very helpfully, Jo Swinson has said that you have the chance of winning the election. Ruth Cadbury's got immense Remain credentials. Why are you splitting the anti-Brexit vote?
Questions. So do you want me to answer which, so I can answer the first?
Say what you want.
So, I mean, essentially, I think the challenge is that it isn't a single Remain vote. It is a complex situation in a general election, and with the best will in the world, Ruth, no matter what her credentials, is standing for a party which is sitting on the fence with regards to Brexit. And in fact, you've had Len McCluskey coming up and saying that they may well back if they renegotiate something, that they may well back Brexit. And it is very hard for people who passionately want to make a statement about Remain to have to vote in that position. There's also a genuine challenge that people have around Jeremy Corbyn, particularly amongst the very moderate Tory Remain vote, and they need somewhere they feel they can go where people like, for example, Michael Heseltine, Matthew Parris and others feel that they've got a party that is moderate with sensible policies that are costed. The Institute of Fiscal Studies actually have our policies, the only one of these three parties sitting here, have actual policies that they said are implementable and affordable and ambitious. So people do need that choice.
We'll talk about the economy later. Thank you for that, though. I want to get one thing clear. You support Remain. You want us to stay in the European Union.
I believe it's the best
and Ruth Cadbury's party, which says it will have a final say referendum if it's in government. Yeah,
that's right. It will say a referendum. Sure.
Yeah, final say referendum. And the Tory party is absolutely clear that they will instrument Brexit at once on the 31st of January. But if people vote for you and stop Ruth Cadbury winning in this seat, we know we're going to get Brexit for absolute certain.
No, not at all.
What?
You actually look at you're assuming I won't
the
win.
Tories win, we won't get Brexit.
Well, you're assuming I won't win if people vote for me.
Jo Swinson been pretty clear the Lib Dems don't have a chance.
Well, hang on, are you talking about the seat or are you talking about
but why are you splitting the Remain vote in this constituency? By standing against the incumbent Labour
So to my point, my view here is if you actually look at the European election results, the Tory vote collapsed here. Liberal Democrats in Brentford and Isleworth won in Brentford and Isleworth in the European elections. The Tory vote collapsed to 9%, and we are seeing that on the doorstep. People just cannot buy into. We have a moderate Remain Tory vote here, and they are coming to us. In our view, this is a competition between Labour and the Liberal Democrats. The Tories are absolutely nowhere. They've lost us, and we've got...
Hang on, you got 5% in the last election.
Things are changing. I'm talking about the last poll that was taken in this constituency. The Liberal Democrats won London in the European elections. It is entirely reasonable, and people are sticking to their guns. They are absolutely sick of the main two parties who are you basically have options and they're co-opting people's votes. And more people I'm speaking to on the streets are absolutely sick of being told by the two main parties, vote for me, but I'm not going to deliver what you want. If you're a Remainer, you're going to get some sit on the fence view. I mean, it is not enough to be able to say that people are just being co-opted across the two parties. And actually we are seeing an absolute change in the electorate, which is showing in the polls.
But the fact is, and you know this, that the EU elections are for protest votes. This is a real election.
Well, all I'm saying is the evidence I have, all I'm saying is that on the evidence that we have, people are sticking with us. And actually, to say that a 9% Tory poll in this constituency isn't material is, I think, a little bit overstating. If it was,
Yeah, but the Tories came last in the Euro elections, and they're now way ahead in the polls to win this one. So you're making an awful lot of, you're putting a lot of meaning on the Euro elections, which they don't really deserve.
I'm putting meaning, but I'm looking at the evidence that we are speaking to people on the streets, and they are coming to us, and that is the evidence. And they are definitely not backing the Tories.
Thank you very much, Helen. Well, the first question to Ruth Cadbury is, I mean, I do talk to loads of people who say we're fed up with Brexit. The Tories are going to get it, it'll happen. Labour, there's another sort of months and months and months of dithering. Well, I mean, what do you say to those people? We meet them all the time.
Sorry, which people?
Voters! I know.
I'm meeting voters, 3 or 4 hours a day at the moment. So I've spoken to hundreds and hundreds of people since this election was announced, and we were speaking to people over the weeks and months before this election was announced. And obviously I'm meeting people who have a range of different opinions, but the vast majority of people I speak to voted Remain. I speak to a fair chunk of people who voted Leave for a variety of reasons and realised that they were A, lied to, and B, that actually it was a protest vote at the time of the referendum, and actually if they were given the choice now, a clear choice between Remain and a deal clearly set out, that they would have a look at that deal and probably vote for Remain. And of course, this constituency, a third of this constituency is Hounslow wards with a large working class Asian vote, and many of them were lied to by the Dominic Cummings machine in the referendum, and were told that they should vote Leave in order to ease their immigration problems, because EU migrants would be sent home and would be restricted.
Seena, what do you say about this allegation that the Asian voters were lied to by the Cummings vote Leave machine?
Well, I can assure you, if I had the chance to vote again, I would be voting to Leave, and clearly I am of a BAME background.
I'm talking about people who would not now vote to Leave, because they've recognised in their workplaces, either the businesses they run or the places they work, they're seeing, either already are seeing or know that they will see serious economic problems if we leave the EU. And this is West London, the second most prosperous geographic economy in the UK. And if we're seeing the pressure here, which we are, then the rest of the UK is feeling it and will feel it even worse.
Seena.
But Delta Poll has been running polling all this year to see if there's an appetite for a second vote, a second referendum, and there isn't. I think nothing's gone beyond 41%, that's the average. There's no appetite for a second vote. People just want certainty. Businesses want certainty, and I can say that having spoken to many, many businesses in this constituency and across the country. People just want to know where this country's going. We want to get on with it, and we want to start building a future that is going to allow us to build our economy, provide jobs for our young people, and provide them with a good education.
May intervene there as an actual businesswoman of over 18 years' experience, and just saying that the idea of 18 years' experience, that essentially the idea that you're bringing certainty through Brexit for business is actually incredibly, I'll be kind, misleading. Because, quite frankly, we are now, if you enter into any sort of Brexit, and actually hard Brexit isn't off the table, because as Barnier said tonight, what you're doing is essentially going into 10 to 15 years of trade negotiations with the majority of our trade deals across the world. We have already seen in 2018 4 quarters of investment in this country dropping. That is absolutely catastrophic for business, and it is going to be turmoil for the next 10 to 15 years. I know, I can't afford 10 to 15 years of that.
So answer Helen's point that there's no certainty by going out on the 31st of January about what's going to happen to British business at all. We don't know the shape of the free trade deal.
look, with respect, anyone in business who really strives to achieve in business has to take risks sometimes. I think this country made a decision in the hope that outside of the EU we would have a better future, and that's where that comes from. And you can snigger at 17.4 million people if you like. That's the democracy we live in.
Anyway, I want you to. This is a Ruth. I'm now going to move it back to Ruth. I feel I'd rather haven't pummeled enough. Ruth, I mean, why you have a party leader who doesn't know where he stands on Brexit?
Actually, I think Jeremy Corbyn's position right now on Brexit. I think Jeremy Corbyn's position right now on Brexit is a credible position, and it's one that Harold Wilson had back in the 70s. And that is, given how febrile people's views are on the issue, I think, and given what I've said, is I speak to a lot of people, and so do my colleagues who are fighting to defend their seats all across the country. What they're saying, what people are telling us on the doorstep, is that they want to have a choice, but they want it to be clear this time. Seena herself admitted that there were many different versions of Brexit, and people voted to leave for many, many different reasons. And what we need is a clear proposal, exactly the same as when we were asked whether we wanted to create a Greater London Authority and a London Mayor. It was all set out what that means, and do you want this, or do you not want that and keep the status quo? And that's what a referendum should be. I think that's an entirely honourable position. There is a deal that can be negotiated with the EU. Keir Starmer told me 2 weeks ago that Barnier and the EU would be happy to negotiate, and could do so quite quickly, to negotiate the Labour leadership's version of Brexit, which retains workers' rights, retains our consumer environment protections, and is much and keeps us in the customs union and the single market. And Barnier has told Keir Starmer that is a credible deal that could be negotiated, and could be negotiated quite quickly. Now, if Labour did win this election, that is what would be put to the people in a referendum against staying and remaining in the EU, which is what I will campaign for.
Isn't there a problem, though? You're one of approximately 100 Labour MPs who pushed for Labour just the campaign to remain, and I presume you will vote that way in the next Parliament. And so when Mr Corbyn, in the event of him becoming Prime Minister, goes to Brussels and negotiates, you are tying his hands, aren't you, with Europe?
In what sense?
Well, you're not allowing him to strike a deal which you can put to the British people.
Yes, that's what I've just said. Is I think it's only right now that there is a second referendum to give people a choice whether to stay or whether to leave, but that the choice is much clearer than the advisory choice that we had back in.
You're going to vote yes to Europe, come what may.
That let Jeremy Corbyn, Keir Starmer, the front bench negotiate the Prime Minister if we win the general election. As Barnier has said, that is a negotiable and an easily negotiable deal in the EU, and put it back to the people. And it is entirely credible and in other nations that do occasionally have referendums on complex issues, they often are two-stage processes. So I think that's an entirely credible position to have. Negotiate, agree with the other side, the EU, then put it back to the people. And that is what Brussels is expecting and would be happy to see.
There's one and then, supposing all of this happens as you want, and there is a referendum, and it's won 52-48 by the Yes campaign, by the Yes to Europe campaign, when the country is just as divided as before.
Well, it would be, unlike the last referendum, it would be a legally binding referendum. It would have clear governance processes, and it would have a clear absolute clarity with legal backup about what the two options would mean.
Yeah, but you don't answer the question. You're not going to solve the divisions in the country. It'll still be very, very heavily split.
I mean, I mean, I don't think, as I say, it would be clear, because as we've already said, and as Seena has said, people voted leave for lots of different things, for lots of different reasons. Some people voted because they didn't like the rules imposed on us. So I asked people, well, which EU rules don't you like that were imposed on us that we didn't opt out of, like the euro? Bendy Bananas comes up. Bendy Bananas, of course, was a fabrication of one of the tabloids. There, you know, and they go, oh, so which rule? Oh, they don't actually know any rules that they didn't like, because there aren't any rules that they didn't like. A lot of the leave arguments were fantasies and lies.
Now let's Seena. So a lot of the leave arguments are fantasies and lies. How do you react to that comment from the MP?
No, I think it's a real shame that you have belittled 17.4 million people to the point that you've said that they didn't know what they were voting for.
What she's saying is they didn't know they were being lied to.
They knew what they were voting for, they didn't know they were being lied to.
And you're telling me there were no lies.
Seena?
If your argument is there are lies on both sides, that makes the whole thing redundant in the first place. So, I mean, for goodness sake, trying this false equivalence is inappropriate. I mean, given, to be honest, at the moment, the number of lies that are being exposed as part of the Conservative manifesto right now, in terms of the number of
What about your polling that you just gave 5 minutes ago? That's blatant lies. You're not going to win this general election.
I didn't say we were going to win the general election. I was talking about the seat, and I said that you were polling at 9% of the Euros, which is true. Nothing I have said.
All right, thank you. We're now going to move off the subject of Brexit. Thank you very much for answering questions. And once again, if you want to come in on a question, when I'm questioning a candidate, come in, and if you don't think I'm doing a good enough job, just take over. First of all, Ruth Cadbury, I mean, you say that Labour says it's going to raise the health budget by a whopping sort of 4.3%. I think I'm right. How can you possibly afford that?
I don't keep all the figures in my head, but if anybody wants to look at our spend figures and our income generation figures clearly tabulated, look at the intro page in the Grey Book. It's clearly tabulated. But I think the current government is spending well under the need for the NHS in revenue terms. I think it's and is promising an additional 1.3 billion. The independent health experts say we should be spending some 3 billion, and that doesn't even account for the maintenance backlog or the capital needs of the NHS. So our commitment to 4.3 billion growth in the revenue NHS spend is what's needed, and it is fundable. We also are committing to increase mental health spend by 1.6 billion and address the maintenance and capital backlog. And also we've got an awful lot of old equipment, MRI and other expensive kit that is out of date and needs renewing, and there's commitments for that as well.
Well, I mean, your spending plans are an enormous boost to the national deficit. Do you really think that the markets will allow you to start spending the epic sums you're talking about, which you want to invest in the NHS?
They're not an enormous spend. They don't contribute to the deficit. I mean, because if you raise the income through through taxation, and also I also say if you grow the economy, then we can increase the economy that also generates taxation. That is also it's not a simple household spend, because a nation is an economy. You invest in an economy to grow an economy, and and grow the ability of public services to deliver for its people. But we also underspend in our health budget compared with many other competitor countries, and we're paying the cost as a result.
The Institute of Fiscal Studies does say, as a whole, what Labour's doing is unaffordable and isn't feasible in terms of the amount that you're borrowing versus the growth, particularly given the amount of renationalisation that you're spending on that. If you're going to borrow, you need to borrow to grow. I mean, the Liberal Democrats have basically said we're going to borrow 130 billion infrastructure, but ours is based on remaining in the EU with a £50 billion Remain bonus. With the best one in the world, you're going to be, you don't know whether you're going to remain in the EU or not, and it is not clear that you can really raise those funds. And
well, first of all, let's not confuse revenue, income and expenditure with capital investment and borrowing. You know, that we need to keep them separate, and certainly I've had 25 years of discipline on that in terms of being a councillor. And as I said, the revenue spend is set out in the Grey Book, and our borrowing and capital investment is there, but you don't. If you invest in kit, you recoup in benefits. But also, if you invest in early mental health intervention, in community care, in public health care, and in adequate social care, then you cut a lot of the increased cost in acute NHS spend, and of course, hospital beds are the most expensive form of NHS spend in terms of us as patients.
We'll come on now to ask a question of Seena. There is a crisis in the health service. You accept that, don't you?
Yeah, so it needs serious reform.
You accept that the winter crisis doesn't come occasionally, it comes every year. You know, you agree with that now?
Yeah.
Now, you accept that ambulances have to be diverted to other hospitals, urgent operations are being cancelled, and so on, yeah?
Yeah, and I think that we need to do more and we need to do better. I absolutely agree.
And you accept that that's all happened under a Conservative government and you've been in power for the last 10 years?
It's also been happening before the Conservatives were in power. Quite frankly, I get really fed up with the NHS being used as a political football.
I get quite fed up with the NHS getting worse and worse every bloody year.
That's not a new thing. That's not a new thing.
I'm in America. I come from a country where we don't have anything with the NHS, and the NHS is beautiful.
It's brilliant.
I agree with you.
And it's getting worse and worse
agree
every
with you.
year. Sorry.
So can I come back to the question?
Yeah.
So the question, look, for me, the NHS is my favourite thing about Britain. I think it's a fantastic thing, and we must invest in it and we must protect it. And under the Conservatives, who have looked after it for more years than any other government,
You haven't looked after it. That's exactly what you haven't done. For 10 years you've neglected it.
I'm sorry, when we entered government with the Lib Dems,
No,
we
you had 10 years to put it right, and you haven't.
and we are now. Boris Johnson came in as the leader of the Conservative Party, as Prime Minister, and has from day one started making those investments that we desperately needed, and so did Theresa May. In fact, we were leading the way in terms of how much money we were pledging to put into the NHS at the last
Check on that.
Do you accept that 11,000 NHS staff from the EU have left since the Brexit referendum?
I think that's really sad. What I would like to make a point of saying is, there were a small number of people that did vote to leave because they were racist, but not over half the country. Over half the country did not leave because they were racist. And the fact that people felt that they couldn't stay here and they didn't feel welcome. And that's really what this is about. You know, they felt unwelcome, and I think that's really sad. I think we need to sort that problem out.
But no, well, why should? Excuse me. Why should we Why should anybody in this room believe a word you say about the NHS? I don't blame you personally for this, by the way. You're just a local. Thank you for reminding me. It may not be true in 3 weeks' time. Now, when the Prime Minister, your party leader, persistently lies about the NHS, he says, we're going to build 40 new hospitals. That's nonsense. You're not going to build a single new hospital. You're going to refurbish 6. That's your plans. And he simply goes on and on lying about the NHS. Why should anybody in this room believe a word you say, however well-meaning you are?
Again, we've got very simplistic pledges that actually break down into more complex discussions. So the hospitals, there is seed funding available so that we can start to plan for the next generation of hospitals. We need to do this. We haven't got enough hospitals, and we're putting the plans and the funding in place to allow for new hospitals to be built. In terms of nurses, you know, that's another pledge that has been...
All right, you have seed funding available. You put aside a few £100 million to make plans for 34 new hospitals. Why don't you just say that? Why are you saying why do you tell voters we are building 40 new hospitals when you're not?
Because that is the intention.
Why aren't you honest about the NHS?
That is the intention.
Yes, but you're not.
Your seed funding is after the next general election after this one. When you're actually going to deliver is when you actually can't commit to do it at all. And also, you made a statement about making more investment in the NHS than ever before. That came out of your own mouth. That is not adjusted for inflation. For the first time, you're using data which doesn't adjust for inflation. And actually, if you do adjust for inflation, you're making under-investment in the NHS. And those are the actual, that's off the fact check sites on the BBC. You're literally saying this to us now.
If you spoke to your colleagues that were in government with the Conservative Party once we took over from the Labour administration, who said there was no money left. We were borrowing £1.
What are you talking about? Addressing the point you've just literally...
The point I'm trying to make is, right, when we took over government from the Labour Party, our economy was in a really, really bad state. We must have a strong economy to fund our public services. And we have built a strong economy.
Anyway, I'm now going to move on.
We've got record employment.
Very briefly, Ruth will answer.
Can I just finish my point,
quickly,
please?
Yeah.
Look, we are at a point now where we are in such a strong position with our economy, we can start to invest in our public services. And now you're saying, sorry, we've had enough of the Conservative Party. We'll get somebody who's going to spend their way back into debt again. I just don't get it. I really don't.
Now, Ruth Cadbury.
I remember coming in, when Labour came into government in '97, and there were trolley waits and people dying in A&E, 24 hours waiting in A&E. Labour committed to ending trolley waits and to ending long-term waiting for diagnosis and treatment. We delivered that. We delivered that. We are now seeing in the last 2 or 3 years increasing numbers of frail, elderly and very sick people waiting for hours and hours, well over the 4-hour limit, in hospitals because they have no beds to put them in. I've visited the A&E at West Mid recently, and they told me just how dire it was. There are people there who shouldn't be in hospital. There are people there who they couldn't discharge because they hadn't got services for them. There were people there who couldn't be treated because they didn't have adequate specialist clinicians, consultants and so on to look at them because of the vacancy rate at nationally 100,000 NHS posts. And Charing Cross Hospital up the road, after 7 years of threat of demolition and the A&E closure, now needs 300 million just to bring it up to basic maintenance standards, and it's promised 3 million seed corn in a 2 or 3 years' time to help it along with its plans.
Yeah, no, I want to move on. We've been giving Seena a hard time, but Helen, look, your party was part of the coalition government which introduced austerity and for the NHS as for everybody else. Are you going to apologise to the people here who wanted more spending? This lady here, will you apologise, this lady at the front? These people here?
Well, I think what we would say is that every single party on this platform ran under austerity in 2010. In fact, the Lib Dems managed to rein in the Tory excesses and actually brought in austerity lower than the Labour manifesto at the time. So you could say that we actually made sure and safeguarded many of our services. There were some very difficult decisions that needed to be made. We've been very open and clear about the ones we think we would do differently. And actually our view is we are absolutely right and proper in terms of, because we want to remain in the EU, because we get that £50 billion Remain bonus, that we can now properly
Sorry, I'm going to park that for a moment, but anyway, carry on.
We can properly invest in the NHS, and we are actually very clear that we are putting a penny on the pound in income tax that is going to be ring-fenced for health and social services. We are going to radically change and improve mental health services, investing in that. We are also, so radically changing, particularly for youth services, and we are also going to be investing in more hospitals. We are actually also, because of our Remain position, we are going to be attracting back those vital EU citizens who are actually a vital part of our NHS and making them feel welcome and really ensuring our NHS
Why
is
do all
thing
of our
for the future.
NHS, why do they have to come from Europe? Why can't they come from any country so long as they want to contribute to this economy? They can come from anywhere. Why does it matter? They do.
Hang on. Why shouldn't? It seems a perfectly reasonable question to me. Why should they have? Why do
We
they have?
absolutely agree. I mean, we are actually looking, as part of our plans, to ensure that we create actually easier access in terms of and making sure we get the right people within the NHS from all over the world. But I think it just seems like you're setting up two sets of immigrants against each other unnecessarily.
No, not
because
at all.
actually,
Not at all. It's
because actually, if you let me finish, we are part of the EU. We are part of the EU, and part of the EU is because of proximity and our agreements, and it's a peace project. It is allowing us to integrate more, and it has made our country richer and better and richer culturally.
Yeah, all right, so I want to stick. I want to tackle you on one point you made. You presented this virtuous picture of the Lib Dems preventing these dreadful Conservatives from slashing the NHS to bits in 2010. But can I remind you that in 2014 you were still in power when George Osborne's Treasury extended the austerity period for a further 4 years?
I mean, like I said, I think there were decisions made in coalition that we've been very clear. We are very clear now that we are on the right side of history, that we are investing in the NHS. And actually, if you look at the latest data, if you look at the most progressive policies that help the poorest in society, the Lib Dems actually, in terms of both cash and services, help the poorest 1% more than actually either of the Labour or Conservative policies. So a vote for the Liberal Democrats is actually a vote to enhance our public services.
I'm interested, you use that word reform, much beloved of Tony Blair. So what do you mean by reform?
Do you mean within the NHS?
Yes.
So particularly mental health services, actually really making them front and centre. So at the moment you have unnecessary waits for mental health services. They're sort of second class citizens. So we want to make sure that everybody, particularly young people and children, don't have any waits. At the moment, only 35...
You don't mean privatisation or bringing in market disciplines. Well,
No.
on which subject? I want to move back to the Conservative Party and that remarkable remark by President Trump to do with the deal with the states. You know, everything is on the table, including the NHS.
So the NHS, if you take nothing away from me tonight, it will be this: the NHS is not on the table. It is not for sale.
Can I just say...
We have a Prime Minister, Tory Prime Minister, who says we're building 40 new hospitals and he isn't building a single one. Then he says the NHS is not for sale. Why the hell should we believe him?
Yeah.
There is absolutely no appetite amongst anyone that I've spoken to in the Conservative Party to sell our NHS. We want the NHS, we love the NHS. It's one of the best things about this country. We will protect it.
But why in that case did the Channel 4 Dispatches programme reveal a few weeks ago that there have been several strands of trade negotiations about exactly this, the NHS with the states?
Yeah, as far as I'm concerned, I will not be voting to sell our NHS. Our NHS is a public institution, and it should not be sold. It should not be on the table for negotiations with the US.
So when you said the NHS needs reform, what do you mean?
What I mean by that is I think that we need to have a much more holistic approach to how we look at our health, whether it's mental health, physical health. So I would like to see resilience being taught in schools, for example, to try and roll back the mental health issues we have. I'd like to see our young people being more physically active. I'd like to see our adults being more physically active too. And I think we need to try and take more responsibility for our own health, but it comes with education. You have to teach people how to look after themselves. And I think constantly, we have... Well, I'm not saying we shouldn't treat cancer patients. What I'm saying is there are certain things, for example, obesity, diabetes, mental health problems that come down to self-esteem or anxiety, some of the images that young women see on social media, all of these things need to be looked at in a holistic way. And to say that it can be treated by a pill when things go wrong, I think that's not good enough. I think we deserve better.
Well, how are we going to be able to afford these pills? Because it's very easy to say the NHS isn't for sale, and we're not talking about the Americans writing a check and here's the NHS. What we're talking about is contracts getting wider and wider, less and less control, less and less local control, less and less patient intervention, patient involvement, large corporations increasingly taking over sections here, sections there, and of course there's the pharma, there's the drugs budget. We know that American pharmaceutical companies want to buy into the NHS market, and we know, particularly if we're a little country outside the EU, in a weak negotiating position with the US, that we will struggle to be able to retain reasonable prices for the drugs and treatments that the NHS needs to buy in bulk. And we know
We're going to move on now to the issue of crime. It's very, very important, but I want to throw it over to the audience quite soon. So, Helen Cross, crime is becoming more of an issue, not just in London, but very much here in Isleworth and Brentford.
Yeah.
Street robbery and knife crime actually at a record high. What's your solution?
So we are very clear in the Liberal Democrats. We are going to invest £1 billion in ensuring that we re-establish community policing. That's the equivalent of 2 new police officers per ward in the country. And we are very strong advocates of community good, intimate community policing. I personally would certainly be fighting to ensure we retain our police stations in our local area, like Chiswick Police Station. That said, when it comes to the actual epidemic, the serious issue we've got in terms of violent crime, we want to treat it as a public health issue, because there are young people who genuinely are really being damaged by this. And what that means is we are going to double investment in youth services, so people have a young place to go, that parents have a place of support, particularly who are struggling. That's an equivalent of about £2.5 million extra right here in Hounslow on the budget, doubling it. We also going to have things like, for example, when you're in trauma centres, you actually have someone who's specially trained with youth impact in those trauma centres to be able to help people when they come in. So we are really genuinely trying to build a proper, cohesive, integrated, supportive approach to make sure that when we are tackling crime, we're actually tackling the root causes and not criminalising young people and writing them off. We're not going to give up on them.
I agree with a lot of what Helen's just said, and I'm glad that Sadiq Khan has adopted the policy that was first run in Glasgow, that street crime, youth crime is a public health issue. So I won't repeat the list of interventions that are needed for young people. But let's look at the policing statistics in London. Sadiq Khan lost £700 million per annum from his annual budget that he spent on policing, so therefore he had to cut the police force. And I want to get in that in now, because the Tories blame Sadiq Khan for the cutbacks in policing, and like all local authorities, you can only deliver when you have the funding to do so, and most local authorities, including the Greater London Authority and the Mayor of London, have been dependent on roughly half their income coming from central government, as that was the case in 2010, and it's been cut, and it's been cut, and it's been cut. And that's why we've got fewer police on the streets, that's why we've got fewer youth services, that's why we've got less mental health and counselling support in schools, that's why the courts are a mess, that's why probation and youth offending teams are underfunded and can't support the young people, and that's why we don't have an adequate criminal justice system in this country, and that's why people don't feel safe on the streets.
So, Seena, I'll answer some of those attacks from Ruth, and then perhaps say what your plans are to deal with the...
Okay, so me personally, I think that the police cuts went too far, and I wouldn't have voted for those. But what I would like to see now is I would like to see that corrected, and we are starting to see it. We're not. The uniformed police presence that's now being trained up is going to take a couple of years to come about. I think we need to actually find ways to keep hold of some of our more experienced officers. I think that would be a sensible initial action, and that's something I would lobby for if I was elected as the MP. The other thing as well is youth crime is something that I actually know quite a lot about. So I've visited a Young Offenders Institute. I've met some of these young lads that have stabbed people and killed people, and quite often, once they go through that system and they're getting the appropriate support and they're getting the appropriate encouragement and education, they're really lovely children. And that's the key thing, they are children. They are lovely children. And what we must do is we must find ways to stop children ending up in the classes of gangs. Gangs are the enemy. It's not children. It's the gangs that are encouraging these children to do the activities that they're doing, and quite often trapping them into it as well.
How do you, it's not the sort of, I saw a lot of people nodding along with that, including the MP. I mean, is this the line?
I'm not the MP at the moment.
Oh yes, you're not the MP. Thank you for to know that.
I'm hoping to be again.
I put in my place, quite right too. Now, Pretty Patel, it's not her language along this. She presents herself as very hard right. So how comfortable are you with the secretaryship of the Pretty Patel? Feel free to share any doubts you might have.
At the end of the day, we have to be tough on crime. We have to say it's not okay to break the law, and you know, we can't live in a country. It's not a British value to say you can't respect the law. We must respect the law. That's really important. People must live by it. But equally, we need to find more comprehensive ways to stop our young people getting groomed by these really vicious and nasty gangs. And we must find ways to crack down on these increasingly clever gangs as well.
And more police? Children.
Are you happy with British? That's the point. That was the question you were asking. Answer the question.
Thank you, yes.
Answer the question.
Am I happy with Pretty Patel?
Well, her policies, her hardline policies
I like the fact she's tough on crime. I like the fact that she's standing up for
You're
victims.
talking about a much more...
But what I'm saying is further... Look, I agree with the things that Pretty Patel is doing. What I would say is that I would like to push for and lobby for more of the preventative measures that we need to take. We need to find ways to look after and support our young people that are in very vulnerable situations.
Why did you close 700 youth centres then?
Those policies are, what are you going to do?
Then how does that reconcile with the very hard line that's been taken, and I believe you took yesterday, about stop and search, which is...
But I do think we have to...
But that is targeting, to be fair, indiscriminately young people, and actually is...
It was a US...
We need to stop and search. It's not okay to carry knives, and we need to crack down on it. It's
Anyway, I'm going to move us on, and I'm going to, I hope, if the Conservatives win, Seena, I'm going to move on, because if the Conservatives win the election, I'll be putting it to questions very soon. I want you to be Home Secretary, not Priti Patel. I'm going to ask all three of you a question. We're going to be on climate change, and very briefly the economy, and then we're going to throw it open.
Oh dear.
Climate change, very quickly, where do you all three stand on the expansion of Heathrow? Ruth Cadbury.
I mean, I've been opposing the expansion of Heathrow for over 20 years. And as an MP, and if an additional reason to oppose Heathrow was needed, not that an additional reason is needed, but there's absolutely no doubt that I think it's 6 million tonnes of CO2 additionally a year that a third runway will mean. It is absolutely contrary to any commitments this country can make to cutting its carbon emissions. So it's absolutely a non-starter legally now in terms of climate change, let alone all the other reasons of noise, air pollution, noise pollution and traffic congestion, etc., etc., etc. And it's not needed.
All this economic growth is going to pay for your massive spending on the health service. You're not going to expand Heathrow. Where does Britain stand economically?
Well, even the government's own figures of the economic net benefit of Heathrow expansion are marginal. All of the additional passengers that the third runway will bring are UK-based residents taking leisure flights out of the UK. Because business...
So you're going to ban that, are you? And just let
no, I'm not saying I will ban it, but it's actually taking the British pound, the British holiday pound, out of the UK. So there is...
Skegness next year, people.
Skegness, the Lake Districts, the Scottish wildernesses, the seasides of Britain could do with our money if we do, if we are lucky enough to be able to afford a second and a fourth holiday a year. Why not take that holiday in the UK?
Helen.
Well, I would say I get to the lakes every year, the Liberal Democrats are very clear. We've been consistent and unified as a party. That are very clear that if you want to stop Heathrow, vote for Liberal Democrats, because we are absolutely united and we've been consistent in our position. Economically, it doesn't stack up, and of course, it's now integral to our position to get to zero emissions by 2045. And in fact, we are looking at, as part of our detailed and costed plan, to look at no net runway expansion across the whole of the UK as part of that plan. Sometimes you have to make difficult decisions. We need a plan.
I wrestle with the same conceptual problem as I do with Ruth. You want to close down aircraft expansion.
Just stop expansion.
So I wasn't asking a question of you, I was asking Helen. You stop expansion and then you expect the economy to grow.
Well, we are actually investing 130 billion in growth. So we're doing things like investing in the green.
In growth. That's very social.
Well, no, it's not. I mean,
you're free market work, don't you?
No, what we're doing is investing in infrastructure that enables. We invest in infrastructure.
Chair.
Yeah, Liberal Democrat.
Answer your question.
We actually, if you want to make significant change and transformation within an economy, it's a huge super tanker to move around. You need to, and government can be a force for good in terms of investing in and enabling businesses to be able to innovate. And we are absolutely committed to doing that. So which is why we started the Green Investment Bank, which is absolutely targeted at creating innovation for green technology. And it's things like that which we need to ensure that we have an economy that is sustainable for the future.
Yes.
Air travel with the best will in the world is not the future, not for what we need to have a planet and to have a growing economy.
It's true.
See, you're quite, the Tories are rather ambiguous. Well, I don't know, the government backed the expansion in 2018 with the exception of the Prime Minister who managed to go to Afghanistan miraculously. It was a Conservative manifesto commitment in 2017. It's a bit sort of blurred in the current election. Where do you stand?
Right, look, 4 days as aside, I don't agree with expansion, and I really don't think that it would, as Ruth said, it would pass any kind of criteria now based on the environmental impact. It just isn't compatible. What I would like to see furthermore is actually I'd like to see us, we're world leading in terms of battery technology in this country, and there is now, you know, and when I started talking about this, I thought it was sci-fi, but you can have electric planes, and there are more cleaner ways to travel by air in the future. And
not till 2050.
But we've got to create the right environment.
You need the Green Investment Bank.
We've got to create the right environment for businesses to want to invest in these technologies, and that's something I've been really passionate to do. The other thing as well is I'd quite like to see slot allocation reform. So at the moment, if airlines don't use their landing and take-off slots, they lose them, and then you have ghost flights and you have low occupancy flights. They're completely unnecessary and completely incompatible with fighting climate change, and we must stop that policy.
Good for you.
One question especially for you, because I received a press release from Channel 4 just before I came. Yeah, and it said that on Channel 4 is holding a climate change debate on Thursday night, and all the party leaders are going, with the exception of two. One of them's Nigel Farage, he's not going, and the other is Boris Johnson. Now, I'm quite interested that climate change is a huge issue, and all the other party leaders, apart from Farage, is going. We know what he thinks about that sort of thing. How chilled are you about your leader not boycotting the debate on climate change?
I would like to understand why he's not there. I've not had the opportunity.
I'm just asking you.
But I think it's an important issue that we must be seen to show what our track record is. You know.
So you're very disappointed, rather shocked, Anna.
I never said disappointed. Shocked, I definitely was, because I think we've got a great track record. You know, we are.
What's your view about? Hang on, just yes or no answer. Are you ashamed that Boris Johnson is not appearing on Thursday night on this national debate on climate change?
I can't say because I don't know why he's
I
not
just
there.
said.
I don't know why he's
All right,
not
you're
there.
ducking that question.
If he hasn't got a good reason for not being there, then I would be.
What would be a good reason?
They should send you. You do a good job.
I'll do it.
What would be a good reason?
The government track record on actual action on climate change is so short, you wouldn't have a lot to say anyway.
Anyway, we're now moving on. We'll move on now to the economy. We're moving on to the economy. Now, Ruth, I've got a list of your magnificent spending commitments, and they all sound jolly good in isolation. You're raising the national minimum wage, stopping the state pension age from rising, national care service, ending universal credit, nationalising rail, water, electricity, care budget up by 3.3%. How on earth does that get paid for? And the IFS thinks it can't be.
Do you want me to get the Grey Book summary? Because it's, from what I can remember, one of the biggest chunk is bringing corporation tax up to 21% for small business and 26% for other businesses. That is still significantly lower than the lowest it ever was under Margaret Thatcher, which I think was 30, 32, 33% when Mrs Thatcher was Prime Minister, and is in line with most equivalent economies, and it's bringing it back up to the level it was not so long ago. So it's not an exorbitant cost. That's not an exorbitant hike, and as I say, is comparative to other countries. We're looking at bringing inheritance tax to equivalent to income tax levels. Gosh, I can't remember the whole list. You know my record.
You're putting up taxes.
Putting up taxes. Sorry, income tax to the top earning 5%. So those earning over 80-something thousand, to the top 5%. And even then, those people, and I accept that will affect many voters in Chiswick, but many voters in Chiswick that I know on high incomes are actually saying I would be prepared to pay more income tax because I can see the impact of cuts in public services because there is the tax spend. But even for those, even for high earners, and I think the tax would be 45% and then 50% over 130,000. Even then, their personal tax bill proportionately would be lower than those on the lowest 10% of income, because low earners pay a higher proportion of their income in tax because of VAT and other taxes that you can't avoid.
Now, Helen, you've got a problem, haven't you? I mean, the credibility of the Lib Dems having been part of austerity cost you, well, actually 49 seats, I think, in the last.
It's a tough hit.
And how do you win back your popularity?
Well, we won the European elections from a Labour Party perspective, and in London we did. We got the most MEPs. And I think you can see that in the polls we've been polling up in sort of 20s to 50%, you know, we're getting there. I mean, I think what we're seeing is that people are genuinely feeling that they're absolutely frustrated with the current system. Neither of the two main parties...
I wasn't asking, sorry, I was asking about your reputation for being the party of austerity.
Well, I don't think we're quite
You seem to be keen to retain, judging from your, perhaps admirably so.
Well, we are absolutely still want to reduce the national debt. I think I go back to the Institute for Fiscal Studies, which says that we are the only party that has actually a sensible and deliverable set of policies that are financially costed. I think actually also if you look at the output, if you actually look at the data, there's just been a recent report out that says basically if you look in terms of the benefit to the bottom few percent of the population, the Liberal Democrat actual policies deliver more than either in terms of cash benefits and services than either the Labour or the Tory offers. But what we are actually doing is we are remaining in the EU, making sure we retain that stability in our economy, allowing us to grow and tackle the future, because what we need to do is tackle obviously inequality, but we've got the climate crisis, which means we absolutely need to invest and shift our entire economy, and also in robotics and AI. So we're also you've got a huge technological shift that we need. That's a huge shift we need in the population's skills and what we do. To do that, we are taking that £50 billion Remain bonus and investing it in public services, making sure people are able to do that, but also borrowing responsibly.
But you've used this phrase before,
Yeah.
to clarify what that is.
That is the clarification. So that is, and it was by the Institute of Fiscal Studies considered absolutely a reasonable estimate. It is basically what we would get by an increased GDP from remaining in the EU, and it's the equivalent of the taxable revenue from that.
Seena, is that right? So the IFS agrees with it, so you're going to have presumably by implication, the Tories have a 15 billion Remain.
They've got more than that. Well, in fact, actually, if you look at the Tory party assumptions on their actual manifesto, and actually, they actually assume there's going to be no impact on the economy at all from Brexit. They're just assuming a flat. It's absolutely crazy when every single economist actually estimates, well,
Every single economist?
Well, one. There's one economist, okay, I'll give him, with one exception, who thinks that it will kill the manufacturing industry.
Let's talk
Say
to
it's not
Seena
going to
about that. I mean, so your manifesto makes the assumption, according to the Liberal Democrats, that there will be no effect of Brexit, even though most economists, including the IFS, the hugely respected IFS,
And the Treasury.
Well, yeah, that's true.
expect the economy to take a hit.
So they've never got anything wrong before. Just putting that out there.
So,
Look, they make estimates. That's what economists do. They make estimates, and they make and they make judgments on what they think will happen. They don't know for certain because they haven't got a crystal ball that tells them so. They make educated guesses. They do get it wrong and they get it right. And we just don't know. Quite frankly, we don't know what will happen. But the fact when we leave the EU, there could be amazing economic opportunities.
Such as?
With the US? Good luck.
Okay.
All right, the Ruth briefly, and
The economy is driven by enterprise and businesses. I can give you 3 examples of businesses owned by people who live in this constituency who either have already been hit badly or know they will be hit badly by Brexit. We've got the manufacturers of quality cosmetic creams whose factory is in Acton. They are saying Brexit in all senses will hit them. They have an actual experience of trading under WTO terms. They export to EU with no barriers, no costs and no extra paperwork at all. They export to the US with some additional paperwork but less because there's a national favoured status with US trade, and they would trade with Saudi Arabia. They export to Saudi Arabia, and every single shipment has massive cost, massive paperwork, additional tariffs, and it's only because it's the Saudi Arabian market where they can pay more that they can continue to trade in Saudi. They can see exactly what Brexit will mean in terms of ending our smooth and unfettered trade with the EU. I spoke to a furniture shop in Kingston that is really, really worried because every 2 weeks they bring in a shipment from Holland. It comes in quickly, no delays. They know there's cost, uncertainty and delays at Calais, and they're not shipping goods that have a short shelf life because they're shipping furniture, but they know the impact of what would happen. And I've got a 3rd example as well of a company
I'm going to move you on.
that
There's a lot
closed, has had to close, sack everybody, 15 staff, a small firm in Brentford.
The irony is, Brexit, people who support Brexit say that they're railing against red tape. The reality is, Brexit is going to create enormous amounts of red tape for businesses that they currently don't have. GlaxoSmithKline has said it's going to cost them £50 million a year to deal in a Brexit environment. This is not something our businesses...
It's a cost.
I advise businesses, and I advise businesses in innovation. I can guarantee you, when a business wants to take an investment risk, they do sue for growth. They don't sue because suddenly the whole environment changes. This is a reckless decision for business. It's reckless for our economy, and it's reckless for ordinary businesses.
I want to move on, but before we move on, I'd like Seena to respond to what it means to small businesses, Brexit, when it happens.
So, as somebody who has got her own small business and helps other small businesses, I can assure you that by 99% of them just want us to deliver the vote, start getting on with Brexit, and create some certainty about what that's going to mean. And I can assure you that they are more scared about a Marxist government than they are about Brexit. I don't think so.
Now I'm going to move on to a matter. Right, we see we're all worried about the high street. Everybody in this place and everybody in Britain. Ruth Cadbury, how are you going to do? What are you going to do to save the high street?
Do you mean generally or specifically?
Both, I think.
Okay. I mean, I live in Brentford, and we've got half the high street is closed because it's being demolished and being rebuilt. We've lost the post office. I have tried to force the post office to come back into another business in Brentford, but the criteria that the post office used for taking on new businesses to host post office counters is so tough that none of them will take it, and that's a real loss to Brentford High Street. But I live in, as I say, I live in Brentford. I often come to Chiswick, and I can see that we're seeing a high turnover and closures of the so many of the wonderful independent shops, cafes, restaurants, pubs, beautiful, and you know, despite appearances and some of the spending ability of many people in Chiswick, actually those independent businesses are running on really, really short margins, really, really small margins, and rents are going up, and the negotiating power can't compete with the multiples. Business rates, we have a real mess with business rates in this country. They should. It's just a real mess. We're in our manifesto proposing a reform of business rate system, because I think it's broken, and I think what independent shopkeepers, particularly in Chiswick, which is the highest business rates, highest rateable value of retail premises in Hounslow, they're being worst hit, so they need to do something. I have offered to meet with Councillor Joanna Biddulph, who's Conservative councillor, who's done a survey, and I've offered to work with her, because whilst a lot of the issues that the businesses that she surveyed were raising issues that were quite local to Hounslow, relevant to Hounslow Council and the GLA, I said I'm happy to work with the businesses in Chiswick that you've been in touch with on the national issues, but she never came back to me, despite despite me continuing to offer. So I accept it's a mess. There's a lot needs to go, but it really needs a national look at business rates. As I say, we have proposals in our manifesto to address that.
I want to move on, so I want to throw it out very soon to the audience. Helen Cross, what are your plans to save the High Street?
So we have some very specific plans, particularly to help small to medium-sized enterprises. So the first thing we're going to do is scrap business rates. We are going to replace it with a commercial landowner levy. What this basically does is mean that basically shops get charged, or buildings get charged, the landowner gets charged for the value of the land. And what that means is it reduces red tape, because it's a much simpler way of calculating that levy. And the other real benefit, which is very important, is actually it will remove the taxation on utilities, any kind of capital and sort of plant kind of equipment that's put in there. Because at the moment, when businesses who are renters basically invest in their properties, they're charged on those things in business rates. So what it does, it will stimulate and make it easier for small to medium-sized enterprises to actually invest in their shops and actually build and grow, which is what we really want. The other thing we're going to do is actually we're going to extend the British Business Bank, which was set up by the Lib Dems as part of the coalition, which is currently a lender of last resort for small to medium-sized enterprises. We want it to be able to go out and start building more venture capital to support specifically small businesses in terms of giving startup funding. Also, actually for medium-sized firms, longer-term funding as well. So we are building a whole package around helping sustain our small to medium-sized enterprises and our high streets.
I'd like to give your diagnosis, but also, can you tell everybody here whether Councillor Biddulph ought to be talking to Ruth Cadbury? Why? I was rather shocked to learn that the relevant person in the local council wasn't talking to the local MP, even though they've been given that offer.
Yeah, so I don't know about the communications, but of course everybody needs to work together. That's important.
So you would like Councillor Biddulph to speak to do business with Ruth Cadbury, if and when Ruth Cadbury gets re-elected.
Councillor Biddulph is at a council meeting.
No, my apologies that she's not here today.
I think it's unfair to talk about somebody who can't actually speak for themselves. I can't speak for Jo. Yeah. It's, you know, I don't know.
It's a bit upsetting though to learn. I mean, I agree, but she.
But I can't. You can't speak for Chiswick.
I've had many people write to me saying that Ruth hasn't replied to their emails. So you know, it works both ways. So with regards to the high streets. So I was actually the area lead for the Federation of Small Businesses and spoke to many different small businesses, particularly high street businesses, about the problems that they face. So business rates is definitely one, and I think that the Conservative Party got that wrong, and we need to review it, and it's in our manifesto that that's what we're going to do. We're going to introduce business reliefs so that people that are setting up small businesses and are struggling are able to apply for relief as well. The other thing that I'm really passionate about, my mum and dad ran a pub for 10 years, and I'm really keen about saving the pub, saving the local. It's a really important part of the community. We need to, I think we need to look at beer duty, we need to look at business rates relief is going to apply to pubs. So there's a number of different things we can do. There's also funding being put in for retraining small business owners to. So quite often what you find, and this is my business background, is small business owners don't necessarily have the social media skills to keep up with some of the chain businesses that are very quite busy at this sort of thing. So we need to retrain some of our small business owners so that they can keep up. But the key thing is they need to be able to compete with the likes of Amazon, and at the moment there is an inequality there, and we need to find a way that makes that platform much more equal. Yeah. The other thing, specifically local to Chiswick, there are many small business owners that are actually very concerned about CS9 because it's going to stop them from being able to get the deliveries that they need to run their business. It's going to make it more difficult for them to get their deliveries, and also when there are excessive amounts of traffic and congestion because Hammersmith Bridge isn't working and our Labour Mayor won't employ this temporary solution to alleviate that traffic, that's detrimental to business as well. We need to make it really easy for people to be able to get to our local businesses, and then make it really easy for our businesses to get their messages out there.
So Ruth, what was the point here you were taking issue with?
Well, to say that the Labour Mayor's doing nothing about Hammersmith Bridge, I met his Transport Deputy Heidi Alexander with the Conservative councillors in Chiswick to understand how long it will be closed to vehicular traffic and what they're doing about the situation. Right, they had to do a lot of assessment of the structure of a 123-year-old bridge that had been neglected for a number of years, 8 of which were Boris Johnson was Mayor of London. And there is a really difficult decision, which has a choice to make. One of which is high cost implications. Is do they put just single-decker buses on, which have a capacity restriction, or do they put the heavier double-decker buses on Hammersmith Bridge? Because I mean, Hammersmith Bridge has never had lorries and heavy goods vehicles on it for many years anyway. You know, there is a decision to be made. It is complex, and to say the London Mayor has done nothing is actually not true.
Last round of questions for me, and then we're going to audience. I mean the leaders. Audience? Yeah,
Not yet.
No, in a second, madam. You're going to get your opportunity. I mean the leaders in this, the three-party leaders, not altogether. How well have they done? I mean, Jo Swinson.
Your question.
I'm asking. I mean, Jo Swinson's been a bit of a disappointment. She set off by announcing she's going to be Prime Minister. Now she doesn't think that, and there's been the Lib Dem boost in the polls. It's not happened. In fact, we're going to be going down. I mean, you haven't got your message across. Your leader is weak, isn't she?
I think she's been very, very clear and very strong. I think
that tactic hasn't worked, though, has it? To sort of.
Well, I mean, to be honest, I mean, from my perspective, when I actually out on the street, I'll say Jo Swinson, given she's actually a relatively new leader of the party, actually people know who she is. I usually get actually genuinely positive feedback about how she's been doing and how she's been standing up. And I think she is actually a really great example of a woman standing up and speaking out and being proud and unafraid of expressing her opinion. And actually people have been responding to that on the street. And I actually find her a very personal person on the ground. So yeah, I'm really proud of Jo actually.
There you go.
Seena, I mean, are you proud of Boris the way that? I mean, are you proud of Boris Johnson?
Look, at the end of the day, I would not marry the guy. But, you know, during the leadership contest, he said he would renegotiate the deal. Nobody believed him. He did it. He said he would invest in the police. He said he would invest in education. He said he would invest in the NHS, and he was doing all of those things. And his record as London Mayor is pretty impressive. So, yes, I am.
No, just one. Actually, I got from the audience. He says that there's zero tolerance of Islamophobia. He said this on live on national TV. Do you accept that claim by the Prime Minister? There is zero tolerance of Islamophobia inside the Conservative Party.
I think there's been some decisions made recently that I'm really upset about, actually, and I know that we are doing a review. We have committed to that. It's
Not an independent review you aren't committed to, and you're not doing a review into specifically Islamophobia, despite the fact that Boris Johnson promised that when he was running for office.
Okay, well, I will be pushing for that. I think discrimination...
So you accept that he's a liar?
The conversation was about Islamophobia, and I think it's really important that we don't just brush over that. I think it's really, really important to fight hate and discrimination in any form that it manifests itself, and no party should be exempt from that, and no institution should be exempt from that, and I'm going to really be flying the flag to make sure that it's dealt with. And I will say there's been one instance where I've had discrimination, and it was dealt with promptly, and I was very happy with the way it was dealt with.
Should he have apologised? Should he have apologised when he was asked on the question time and he didn't apologise for the burqa comment? Should he have done, in your view?
Look, he offended people, and I think it's wrong to do that, and he should have apologised.
Ruth Cadbury, this morning the Chief Rabbi said in this very powerful intervention, said that Jeremy Corbyn wasn't fit to be Prime Minister. How do you react to that comment?
Well, that's the view of the Chief Rabbi, and I know that Jewish members of the Labour Party and the Jewish community have felt very let down by the time it's taken to address anti-Semitism in the Labour Party, and I'm glad that Jeremy Corbyn did acknowledge that there is anti-Semitism within the party and has committed to address the disciplinary process, and it has been improved and reformed, not before time. But your question was about leadership and the leader, and Jeremy Corbyn is consistent. He has a strong socialist background. The manifesto in 2017 and the manifesto in 2019 are good, strong Labour manifestos in the tradition of our party. We are a strong team, we are a broad team, the party is a broad church, and I think it disappoints me that in the mainstream press, Jeremy Corbyn gets as bad, if not worse, a time than Boris Johnson, who doesn't even know his own politics, lies to the extent he can stare at a bank of press cameras and say there's no press here. Inconsistent. He doesn't even know where the border between the Irish Sea is.
Excuse me, you haven't answered my exact question. Was the Chief Rabbi correct to say that Jeremy Corbyn is not fit to be Prime Minister?
Yes.
I don't agree with that specific point, though.
Yes, the Chief Rabbi was correct, so was the Archbishop of Canterbury.
I'm now going to... the lady in the back...
Thank you. On youth offending, I volunteered for the youth offending service of Hounslow for 12 years. And we are very aware. Sorry, I have volunteered for the youth offending service of Hounslow for 12 years, and in that time it has got significantly worse. Knife crime is on the rise, and one of the main problems for our young people is lack of mental health services, ADHD. Young people who do not have money do not get statemented, they then fall into crime. I don't want it to be like CCTV, where after I've been stabbed, then there will be some kind of action. What I want is, like we used to have, the sure start and that kind of thing. And I'd really like to know exactly what you're going to do about youth crime, because it's a very serious issue. Some of the young people I deal with carry knives, not because they're vicious people, because they're terrified. They live on estates, They share bedrooms with you, little sisters, little brothers. They don't have bedrooms to themselves. Their parents are sleeping on sofas. It is appalling. And this is 10 years of Tory government. I'm sorry, because I think you've answered very well tonight. You've done very well. But it's a real issue. And it's not about picking up the pieces afterwards. We need Sure Start and we need other stuff. And I'd really like to know what you're going to do about that. Not pretty Patel.
Seena.
So all of what you've said, I completely understand, because I've seen it in an organisation where I'm a trustee, and I would be absolutely flying the flag. I'd love to have a meeting with you and find out more about specifically for your organisation what the problems are and how I can help.
It's the Youth Training Service of Hounslow.
Okay.
I mean, these people, the staff are struggling. The cuts they have are unbelievable, and they're dealing with the young people who are NEETs because there isn't enough funding. They get excluded from schools because of all these academies, and these young people are being left behind.
Yeah.
And these children are now 16, 17, 18, and they were babies when this government started. I'm really upset about it.
I mean, I think firstly what we need to do is we need to find ways to keep kids in school. Like that's a really big part of that, and it comes with proper pastoral care, proper supervision, exactly. And I would be flying the flag for that, absolutely.
Thank you.
Madam.
Hi. I'm one of those floating voters. I haven't decided on who I want to vote for, and I'm really torn. As an ethnic minority woman, I find it very, very difficult to put a cross in a box for Labour, knowing that I am voting potentially for a leader who is making another minority feel threatened. So I'm really struggling with that. On the other hand, everything, in my opinion, must be done to stop the Conservative candidate from winning everything. Because I cannot tolerate having a Brexiteer candidate, cannot at all. So my head is going tactically, vote for Labour, because if there's a sniff that she could win this seat, I can't have that happen. On the other hand, my heart is going, as a minority, I cannot vote for someone who's making another minority feel threatened, and I'm really, really torn. So I genuinely don't know what to do. I think you've both done really well, but I don't know what to do.
I'm going to ask all three of you to give this advice. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this is a Labour-Tory marginal, always has been, and even when they felt very enthusiastic, the Lib Dems have never done it very well. When we were in government in 97 to 2010, when we had a Labour government implementing Labour policies, and also when we had Labour in London-wide government as well, we massively increased support for and recognised the discrimination of all ethnic minorities. We we implemented the Equalities Act. We address discrimination. There's more to do, both in terms of legislation and in terms of services. And it's black and ethnic minorities have suffered worst in terms of austerity and the cutbacks of services that Ruth over there just mentioned a small proportion of in terms of mental health support, youth offending and so on. Black and ethnic minority young people and people are disproportionately affected by austerity. If you want to reverse that, vote Labour, and if you want to make a difference here and stop the Tories getting back, your vote in Brentford and Isleworth should come to Labour.
Right. So, Seena, I'm going to ask all three of you to deal with. So, Seena, you give your guidance to. What's your name?
She can't help me. I'm very passionately against Brexit. So
No, all right. We're not going to. But nevertheless, Seena's allowed to have a Seena wrote some commentary on this. Yeah.
She can't help me. My choice is between these. I can't. Boris Johnson for me is
All
not
right.
fit to be Prime Minister.
All right. Give him Seena. Helen.
Yeah, so it's a slight, yeah, I'm on. It's a slight overstatement to say we've never done well here. We polled over 20% of the vote in this it is a marginal seat. So people weren't much ahead of us back in 2010. So people are used to voting Lib Dem, and actually what we are seeing is a big shift. A big shift. I didn't actually hear.
Anyway, carry on.
Sorry. we had a big shift, like I say, that we've seen and we are seeing on the ground here. We are seeing the Tory vote absolutely collapse. So this very much is, from our perspective, a runoff between us and Labour. All I can say is, as I'm also mixed race, I'm also very passionate about minorities, and actually the whole fundamental part about the Liberal Democrats is we do defend the rights of minorities, and part of our stance about Brexit is part of that very, very passionate belief that everybody is welcome here and that everybody should be able to express themselves in the way they need to. We are also spending a lot of our time in our policies, which are quite extensive, making sure that there is access to things like education, mental health services specifically targeted towards BAME and underrepresented groups. So we have got some very, very strong policies to support you as well. So I'm obviously going to say vote for me, but I genuinely think in this time you could vote with your head and your heart.
So Shah, you've had which has given you the better answer?
It's really tough. My heart is with the policy, but I tactically, I'm really struggling. I cannot have a Brexiteer Chiswick candidate. I might have to go with Ruth, but I'm on the day, my heart might
Sir.
Seena, with great respect, we believe in democracy. We voted, and I've lived in Chiswick for 40 years, we voted to stay in the EU. We've had actually a very supportive MP for many years. Why would we vote for you?
So Brexit is just one part of...
One issue.
Just Brexit. You just want me to focus on Brexit?
Well, Brexit, yes.
It is, really.
So,
give them the democracy.
Okay, so this constituency did vote to remain, just about.
No, quite.
Chiswick is different.
No, the whole
62%.
Anyway,
it was 57%.
Come on.
The Chiswick vote was different. But look, at the end of the day, Brentford and Isleworth is part of the United Kingdom. As a country, we voted to leave. But what I can promise you is that I would be delivering on Boris Johnson's deal, but I will also be listening very hard to the concerns that people that voted to remain in this constituency have, and try and represent those views as well.
So can you explain, why didn't she answer the question?
Because actually our MP for the last 4.5 years has actually consistently voted in accordance with the democratic vote of this constituency.
That is
right. It's actually absurd to start saying, oh, Chiswick is different to Hounslow.
Or I get it, yeah. So the charge against you is that you're not really going to represent the majority of your constituents.
Ruth has done amazingly well.
I didn't pay.
Anyway,
No, I met her before.
See, anyway, very briefly, and then we'll move on.
Okay, look, I'm not going to compromise on the way that I am on this issue. You know, I am a Brexiteer. I think that we should deliver on democracy for the whole country.
Why do you think everyone else should compromise?
Exactly.
Now the next. Thank you very much. Now the.
Peter, can I come in?
Oh yes.
Because actually, what Brexit has done, and the Tory approach to Brexit, has disenfranchised a lot of Conservative voters, particularly people in Chiswick. Because Chiswick not in 2017, but before, normally, Chiswick votes about 60-something% Conservative. But it voted 70-something percent to remain. And Boris Johnson has made this an election about Brexit. And it's really, really difficult for a lot of people, particularly One Nation Conservatives, who've basically been abandoned by the leadership.
Anyway, we've had enough of that. The next question is rather.
Just a very quick question to Ruth, if that's okay. Something I hadn't realised until coming here tonight was that a Labour government, in this referendum that's being promised, is going to give the country the option of either staying in the EU or staying in the customs union. And what about people who don't want either of those things. And I just find that, I hadn't realised that those were the only two options that are going to be offered to the country. And it just seems to me a little bit strange, particularly, how the first referendum went.
Well, if a Labour government is elected, it will be negotiating a deal that is consistent with Labour values and Labour policies, which is protecting workers' rights, is protecting environmental standards, is protecting consumer standards, and is also is also the least worst option, and therefore the least economically damaging. Because although we've had a brief discussion about whether, if one represents a Remain seat, one should be a Remain MP. Actually, you're starting to get into the delegate argument, and actually, I believe, however my constituency had voted, I would consistently want to remain, and I think it is honourable for the Labour Party that doesn't want to see rights and standards diminished, doesn't want to see our economy sent down the pan, that it negotiates for the least worst option and then puts that to the people. I think it's completely disingenuous for any party in government to put to the people a deal that it doesn't support.
What the Labour Party are going to do? They're going to negotiate a deal and then campaign against it. I'm pretty sure Emily Thorne
No, two different things.
Chris Doyle. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I have a question. We had a lot of talk about policy, but on integrity. Now, there's a journalist who is not too far away from here who's actually compiled a whole list of lies that have been actually stated by our Prime Minister. And, I just wonder whether we can trust that. But also,
Trust the blog or trust the...
Boris Johnson, he's talked about nurses, etc. But also in terms of Jeremy Corbyn, who originally back in the 70s was against the European Union. I mean, can we really trust his position on Europe? I think it's an issue of integrity, but also an issue of integrity on the issue of racism beyond Islamophobia as well. I mean, how can you talk to constituents and urge them to vote for Boris when he's talked about people with watermelon smiles and pickaninnies and so forth? I mean, I find that, you're asking us to vote for somebody who has been explicitly racist.
No. All right, that's a question for Seena. How do you deal with the question there about the language used by the Prime Minister?
I think some of that language is, I wouldn't choose to use that language. I think it has been offensive. What I would say, that from when I've met Boris Johnson and from what I understand about him, and he isn't racist. I think when you take that language, so for example, the burqa comment, when you look at that article, and I don't know how many people here laughing have actually read the article, but he's defending a woman's right to wear whatever religious garments she would like to wear. The overwhelming message is of acceptance, and he has used questionable language, and I think that we need to get rid of that in politics and in any other workplace in society as a whole. And we need to find more ways to come together and have more respect for each other.
Helen.
Can I make comments about that? This narrative we're talking about, where Johnson is talking about having caused offence, actually very problematic. Actually, what he's doing by using racist language in sloppy ways, let's be honest, he's sloppy in the way he does it and being kind, is he's causing harm. Because actually, racism is a bit like standing on someone's foot. You might not mean to do it, but you hurt someone, and you should damn well make sure you don't do it again if you do it. And every time you use those racial stereotypes, he knows what happens. He's a journalist. He knows exactly the impact and what's going to be caught there. And he's stereotyped Muslim women, who are the people, in terms of hate crimes, since the referendum, which has skyrocketed, Muslim women are the most likely to be targeted. And he's gone right for them, and he's not apologised. And we need to be really explicit. What Boris Johnson is saying is causing harm. And he doesn't apologise for it, and he doesn't seem to care.
Very briefly, then we'll move on. Do you accept or agree that the language used by the Prime Minister has caused harm?
If people are feeling offended, then yes, it has.
It's not about offence.
Well, it is. somebody, I've been, I've suffered racism before, and I know what it feels like. And it's a very subjective thing. Somebody doesn't even have to say something, and you just know they're being racist. And we must stamp this out, and we must call it out, and we must make it absolutely zero tolerance in this country for anyone to use or make anyone feel like that. It's just not right, and I would be standing up against it.
Very briefly.
We've got the insults that he's, the abuse and insults he's given to, and the offence he's given to BME people, but also women. His and gays, absolutely. His comment when Paula Sheriff, who was a friend and the neighbouring MP to my colleague Joe Cox, who was murdered by a far-right racist. And when Paula Sheriff said, could you just calm down your language in Parliament, you should be setting an example. And instead of saying, oh, maybe I should, he came out with that appalling sense of entitlement, the worst behaviour I'm not going to be abusive to everybody who went to Eton, but he is the worst of that type of person. And he said bar humbug. He said humbug. He completely undermined what she was saying, what she was feeling, and she was speaking not just for herself, but many, many MPs, including MPs on your party's side of the House and people across the country. He has a position of responsibility as the Prime Minister. He should be showing leadership in his behaviour, and he doesn't do that. He does the opposite.
I'd very briefly like to say that although I have varying opinions on the candidates, I think it's fantastic to see the 3 candidates from the 3 main parties are women. I think that's a fantastic thing. So I know we're short on time. So a question, and with the permission of the Chair, I prefer the question to be asked in reverse order of how long people have lived in the borough. And my question is, so the person who lived the shortest amount of time to answer first, my question is, what is the best thing about Brentford and Isleworth and Chiswick and Isleworth?
So, who's lived least time in the borough?
I think it's probably me.
Seena.
Yeah, I'll hold my hand.
Go first.
Probably the youngest one, so even if I grew up here, I'd be the youngest. So for me, what I love about it is the diversity. So I think of it as a bit of a patchwork constituency. So Hounslow with all of its sort of ethnic diversity and culture, and then you've got beautiful sort of green bits like parts and Side look like. I've got a photo and it looks like I'm in Countryfile. I love the canals at Brentford, and Chiswick has got this beautiful high street with all these independent shops and lots of character. So lots and lots of different bits of it. And the character that comes with that.
I'm next. I'm just over 18 years in the constituency. And actually, what I've enjoyed the most about standing is actually getting to know a lot of the communities. And I've been blown away. I mean, obviously I live in Chiswick, so I know the fantastic, vibrant community, which is part of this, the Chiswick Calendar and other things that we've got, and actually a lot of the artistic community here. But I'm over in Brentford. It is such a vibrant community there, and it's really got a really interesting mix of people. And similarly, I was out at the Sikh Gurdwara, one of the Sikh Gurdwaras out in Hounslow, and that's an amazing community too. And it's actually the way that people as a cohesive community just really ping off each other. It's an incredibly creative and vibrant place, and that's something that gets me really excited about living here, because it's just brilliant.
Well, I've probably got more at stake in this constituency, in this borough, than the other candidates. I've been here almost 35 years. I brought my husband here and we had our children here. They went to local schools, and I actually live in the centre of the universe, which is Brentford, but I do occasionally swan off into Chiswick. But as Seena said, the diversity of place, the diversity of people, the diversity of the landscape, the opportunities, the places you can shop and eat and drink and so on, it is just wonderful. The other thing that we're really, really lucky about here, and as Helen has touched on, is the community vibrancy. Chiswick in particular, there's so many networks that are interconnected, in Brentford as well. I'm very lucky that my immediate peer group, my immediate friendship group are also the parents of my children's friendship group. So we're incredibly lucky in Brentford to have that connection. And then I keep running into people who our kids went to school with and I knew in various ways. Now, obviously, in 25 years as a councillor, I've also put a lot into this borough, and I am responsible for some of the good things, keeping Waterman's Arts Centre open, making sure things didn't close, putting in some zebra crossings, some housing developments and so on, making sure some of the developments weren't as bad as they were. So I'm a little bit responsible. Of course, I'm not responsible for any of the bad things. No, I'm very lucky, and since I took up running, it's just, you really get to know the river and the canal and the parks when you're running. So it is a great place to represent. It's been an honour and a privilege to represent Brentford and Isleworth constituency, and I hope I can do so again.
By the way, another good thing about it is that Chiswick is the George IV pub. Yeah. Strongly in favour of it. Anyway, madam. Yeah.
I don't think she needs the microphone.
I love you. Here you go. Well, okay, so my question is your name Seena?
Seena.
Seena. Okay. Well, so, I'm thinking a lot about what you said, and the Brexit vote, the vote to leave the EU, had quite an impact on me. And the reason is, and a lot of people felt, if we talk about democracy, because you said, if we are democratic, we will not have a second referendum.
That's not what I said.
Well, okay, not the exact words, but
no,
basically
that's not what I said.
Then what did you say?
I said that if we decide not to respect the vote that happened, then
it's not democratic.
That's not democratic.
Okay.
So that's the same
I'm going to
thing.
tell you what. Let me finish what I'm saying, please. Because what a democracy is based on, you can tell by my accent, I'm from a different country, but a democratic country. If you are educated, when you're educated, you need to be educated to understand how to vote. When you're lied to, that's when things get marred and you are not voting in your best interest. What happened with the Brexit vote? The NHS was going to be saved, billions of dollars are going to be saved. It was a lie. And people did vote based on a lie. Now, do they get a chance? When you say a second referendum is out of the question, why is that? Because people that might have felt that they got to should have a chance to vote again.
So Seena, actually all three candidates, briefly, please. I mean, that's a very, political lying is a feature of every election, one kind or another. But do you accept there was deceit practiced by the Vote Leave campaign in the 2016 election?
So, I mean, the figure on the side of the bus we know was dishonest, right? There were, but there were also untruths on the. Sorry, there were also untruths on the Remain side of the argument as well. You know, that the whole world was going to fall apart, and guess what? It didn't.
All right. The gentleman in the braces at the back.
I'm speaking as somebody who came into the room not sure which way to vote, and the discourse that's taken place has helped me form a view. I want to share that with you. The first thing is, I think that we should honour the result of the referendum. And the result of the referendum was they tried the hardest, and all they could muster was 17.4 million votes of the electorate. That's 37% of the electorate. That means 67% of the electorate did not support it. By a margin of nearly 2 to 1, the population, the electorate of the UK, did not support the proposal to leave the EU. Parliament's view reflects that.
Yes.
And what we're seeing and what we're living in is not the failure of democracy, but the success of it. But what is happening is that the will of the people, not expressed through party allegiance, but through individuals making their minds up and voting for the situation that we're in. And my view for the coming election is that we should absolutely aim to have another hung parliament.
Can we have brief questions? Although eloquent though your speech was, do you accept that there was a difference, Ruth Cadbury, between honouring the result of this referendum, which is what the gentleman seems to be saying, and honouring the result of a general election?
Well, I never said in any of my publicity in 2017 that I will honour the result of the referendum, because I felt that the referendum, I respected people for voting the way they did. I didn't respect the way they were lied to. And Dominic Cummings, who unfortunately is now the advisor to the Prime Minister, has refused to come to the Parliamentary Committee, and I think he's subject to police investigation on the work that he and others did to target illegally lies to specific sections of the electorate to get them to encourage them to vote the way they did. I don't blame many people for voting leave. I blame the people who told them the lies that they thought were truths. The other thing about, as I say, the referendum, because I thought it was a flawed referendum from the outset, and that's why I've been solidly Remain ever since. But also, let's remember, all age groups under 50, majority voted Remain, and one age group above 50 voted Remain, and that's the over the 90-year-olds, the people who were old enough to serve their country during the Second World War, because one of the original founding premises of what's now the EU was to stop European countries going to war again. And I met at Hounslow Pensioners Forum a man who was a teenager and signed up at the end of the Second World War again with other European countries.
Helen.
Yeah, I mean, quite simply, I'm related to people who voted Brexit. I think we all probably are, actually. It's divided, this idea that somehow there's this kind of hatred of Brexiters from a Remain position, or this idea that we're being overly scornful. And we've done an awful lot of listening over the time. And I think the reality is, first of all, it was an advisory referendum. If it wasn't an advisory referendum, it would have been a supermajority, in which case we would not be Brexiting at all. I think it did shock the political classes because they weren't expecting it, and I think actually a lot of what happened just after the referendum was collective shock, which is why we're in this mess. What is the real problem though is after the collective shock you've seen people rise up taking advantage of that and just going down a line which is actually reckless and not remotely reflecting the actual very close vote that it was. It is entirely reasonable for people to look at the facts and change their minds, take a view on what's actually on the table. There was no answer about what Brexit was voted for on the 2016. It is entirely reasonable to take a view on what that looks like, in my view. And we have been great supporters of the people's vote all the way through an advisory referendum, and we voted. We tabled it about 14 times. So we've been pushing that. So it is entirely reasonable to we can respect the vote, but also give people the space and time on reflection to decide whether this is the right thing to do or not.
Seena, Shah, how do you deal with that question?
I mean, that referendum had an exceptional turnout. It was a massive turnout. And when you say to people, in a referendum, everybody's vote matters, right? It's not like a general election. Every single person who voted in that referendum, their vote mattered. And if we turn around and say, sorry, you got the answer wrong, you're going to have to vote again, your vote didn't matter, I think that's really detrimental for democracy. I think the really fair thing to do would be to deliver on the outcome of that referendum and find a way to leave the EU whilst having a close relationship with the EU.
So then my vote in
No, sorry, madam, you've already had a gentleman here.
I'd like to ask a question of Seena, if I may. And it really relates to some of the previous questions about integrity and truth. And what I'd like to ask you is, during this evening, when you've been asked about Conservative policy, on 4 separate occasions you've said, and I quote, I wouldn't personally have voted for it. So my question to you is, does that mean that if we vote for you, we're voting for an MP that will then go and repeatedly vote against the Conservative manifesto? Or does that mean that you're simply telling us what you think the audience wants to hear?
Look, I'm a very sort of authentic person, and I will say it as it is. If I think something was wrong, I will say it as it is, and I have voiced those concerns internally within the Conservative Party. As an MP, the way I would treat it, if I don't agree with what our party is doing, I would lobby very, very hard to make sure that they are making the right choices.
Could I clarify that there are significant areas of the manifesto in which you differ?
I did vote to leave, yes.
Could I
What's that got to do with
sorry,
me
yes.
voting with my party? I vote for Boris Johnson's deal.
Seena, the gentleman here wants to ask a follow-up question.
So could I clarify,
Yeah.
for you, there are significant areas of the Conservative manifesto on which you're asking us to vote, with which you disagree and against which you...
No, that's not what I said.
But you've said that on separate occasions, so I've got it this.
No, but she was talking about the past in those, I think.
But it also applied when we talked about the manifesto commitments on crime and on
I specifically said
on the NHS. You also and on Heathrow. You also mentioned it in terms of Priti Patel and in terms of Boris Johnson.
No, I don't think she said she...
I think you've misunderstood, and I would like to clarify because I think you've misunderstood. Priti Patel, I think we need to be tough on crime, and I completely agree with what she's doing. What I'm saying is that I would lobby for some of the other activities that we need to do to make sure that we are preventing young people from getting groomed by the gangs. That's what I'm lobbying for.
You separately, which is different.
Well, you're voting for 2 things. You're voting for the candidate, and you're also voting for the manifesto in which he stands. And unlike many other people that are that have been in Parliament, I will deliver on the manifesto that I stand on.
Might I suggest a simpler solution is to vote for someone whose party agrees with their policies?
We're going to have one more question, and it's the gentleman over there in the jumper.
Hi, it's actually follows on really. Isn't the real issue the fact that the whipping system in Parliament actually completely negates the whole issue of democracy? Because actually you all 3 are saying sensible things, you've all got good opinions, but none of your opinions matter if actually what you do is you simply follow whipping. Shouldn't whipping be regarded as an illegal activity? It's effectively bullying at work. And if you were free to vote as you thought, we would actually take this more seriously. And that's why the referendum got the votes that it did, because it was the only time that people were actually voting for anything that seemed to matter to them.
Well, that's a really interesting, deep thought to end the evening. Seena Shah, so you would end the whipping. You agree that the whipping system should be ended, and I think he's called Spencer, isn't he, the Tory chief whip? Should be put out of business.
Look, at the end of the day, there are very good reasons for why, as a party, we act collectively. It's because people need to understand what they are voting for when you're wearing a blue rosette or a red rosette or whatever. And you know, there has to be some form of direction and strategic direction from the top. But I think that there's a conversation to be had about how that works.
Helen.
So, actually, I think that's another great reason to vote for a candidate who actually is in line with their own party policies and aren't having to battle them all the way before they get their way. But also, I think actually there's a broader point here.
I haven't disagreed with anything in my manifesto, thank you.
Sure, okay. Just many things that your party stands for. Like Heathrow, for example. But it's just not there. Okay, that's great that they're addressing the big issues of the day. The actual, I think one of the big root causes around this is actually the first past the post electoral system. And actually, if we have proportional representation, people will feel much more confident to vote with where they want. Not on proportional representation. So we, as the Liberal Democrats, have always backed proportional representation because it provides a much better way of ensuring that you get who you want, and also it creates greater accountability for those MPs to their constituents, which immediately gives you far more. Those MPs are made to pay less attention to their party and more attention to their constituents. So we need to change the system as well as the whipping system.
Ruth Cadbury.
I've been an elected Labour politician for almost 30 years, and I am well used to the concept of political discipline, party discipline. Whipping is an integral part of that. We stand on manifestos, we stand for policies and values of our parties in order to deliver on those values, policies and manifestos. And whipping is part of that, and to break the whip is something serious and should have consequences. Now, the times that I have broken the whip have only been around Brexit. We went into the referendum with a strong party policy in favour of Remain and supporting membership of the EU for decades. And we all most of my colleagues in the Labour Party campaigned actively in Remain. And after the referendum, I was one of the majority of the Parliamentary Labour Party who voted for the vote of no confidence in the leader of the party, because we felt not that he had been actively campaigning to leave, but that he hadn't led a strong enough Remain campaign. And because we have this sort of split, the Leave Remain argument in this country has cut across political divides, so it was always going to cause difficulties for members of Parliament. But I am one of those Labour MPs who voted for Chickenhamuna. No, sorry. The first time I broke the whip, I voted against triggering Article 50, because I thought there was no way we can go ahead with Brexit when we hadn't defined what Brexit meant, and that's still an issue. I had a front bench job that I was sacked from because I voted for Chickenhamuna's amendment on remaining in the customs union and the single market, and that is now our policy. The point I'm trying to make, there's a large group of Labour MPs who have been working within the party and within the parliamentary party to shift our party along. We've been putting pressure on our party, and that is why we now have a consensus around the position we've got now, which is there is a better deal to be negotiated with the EU, and then we should put that back to the people of this country openly, honestly, no lies. This is what the deal is. Do you want it or do you want to remain? And I feel that given the whipping system, given the difficulty that the Brexit vote has caused, not to the Labour Party, but to other parties as well, and particularly the Conservative Party, I think I've been honourable without undermining the whipping system. And I think what Boris Johnson did absolutely wrongly, when his rebels, his pro-Remain, or not even pro-Remain, pro-sensible solution to Brexit, some of them, One Nation Conservatives, when they broke the whip, they lost. They no longer were members of the Conservative Party in Parliament, and they've now been forced to stand to leave Parliament or to stand as independents. And they have that whole process. That is just yet another example of the process of undermining democracy and the respect for political parties in this country.
We're about to wrap up, but Seena, how did you feel about very distinguished Conservatives, Nicholas Soames, Philip Hammond, Ken Clarke, Rory Stewart, and others being stripped of the whip by a Prime Minister who himself had defied free loan whips?
No, I think it's always a real shame when you've got such senior people in the party that feel so disaligned with what's going on at the leadership level. I don't know. I don't know what the thinkings were behind why those decisions were made. I'm not, I'm not in cabinet. I'm not running the Labour and the Conservative whip. But what I will say is that I felt that particular vote was such a significant vote that it was really important that as a party we came together and voted together, and it was the consequence of not doing that.
Now I'm going to wrap. By the way, you've been an absolutely glorious audience. I mean, absolutely fantastic. It's been a really old-fashioned kind of political event, and I think I felt very honoured to be part of it. I thought all three candidates are magnificent. Let's give them a huge cheer. This sort of thing it doesn't happen by accident. It requires the most phenomenal amount of work, and it was Bridget who did that work.